Funding for Texas Monthly Talks is provided in part by Public Strategies Incorporated, managing campaigns for corporations, around the clock, around the world. And by J.P. Morgan Chase, a Texas financial institution serving large and small businesses, governments, schools, churches, and individual Texans just like you for more than 135 years. And also by the Matson McHale Foundation in support of public television. And by MFI Foundation, improving the quality of life within our community. And also by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation. And viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm Evan Smith of Texas Monthly. We all said it couldn't be done. And by we, I mean the unwashed, unapologetic know-it-alls who make up the Capitol community. The collection of ink-stained wretches, amateur pundits, professional kibitzers, and other self-anointed insiders who profess to understand the various moves on the chessboard well before they occur. Well, my friends, what we have here is a new king, and the conventional wisdom has been checkmated. On January 13th, the opening day of the 81st legislative session, two-term Republican State Representative Joe Straus of San Antonio emerged from near obscurity to become the 75th Speaker of the Texas House. In doing so, he toppled the man who everyone said was certain would continue in that leadership post for as long as he desired, Tom Craddick of Midland, an immensely powerful, relentlessly partisan, impressively strategic and tactical Paul whose eternal reign was assured, even many Democrats admitted, by his legendary survival instincts. Feared more than loved, Craddick ruled his roost these last three sessions in ways that both enhanced and diminished his standing, along with that of his party, which saw its majority dwindle to only one seat following last November's elections. His opponents, the so-called ABCs, for anybody but Craddick, tried and failed to oust him in 2007. And they might have missed their chance again if not for the remarkably synchronized efforts of 11 Republican insurgents who improbably settled on 49-year-old Straus as their standard bearer, and the overwhelming majority of Democrats who got in line behind him. Who is Straus? What most people know is that he hails from a storied clan with deep ties to the business wing of the Republican Party, that he himself is thought to be an ideological moderate, that he's less opposed to abortion and more supportive of gambling, a family business interest, than most of his conservative brethren, and that he's a consensus builder with a genial disposition that stands as a stark contrast to Craddick's grim affect. More we're sure to learn in the weeks and months ahead. A conversation with the man of the hour, Joe Straus, on this edition of Texas Monthly Talks. Essentially do a version of that. This will be a fun night. Okay. It worked out. I got the call. On the one. On PBS. Lewis. And then I stopped my show to get back to it, but it's okay. Please take your seat. All right, good. Mr. Speaker, welcome.
Thank you. Great
Congratulations on your new job.
Thank you. It was the quickest job interview I've ever had.
Well, it was an interesting process that got you from there to here, wasn't it?
It sure was. It was a surprise.
Could you have imagined 2 months ago, just 2 months ago, that you would, at the end of the first week of the session, be sitting here as Speaker of the House?
No, I really couldn't. Yeah. I was involved in conversations about what we were going to do when we came back in terms of House leadership, but I really didn't ever imagine it would be me.
Right. Well, why do you think it was you? What happened that made it you as opposed to somebody else?
I don't know. I really didn't expect to be selected. And when I went to, well, back up. In December, the group of what grew to be 11 Republicans who wanted to see a change in leadership and tone and management of the House got together in Austin, and we decided that that wasn't the proper time in mid to late December to select someone and to get and to put them forward. But what we did decide was to get back together again on January the 2nd, right, a couple of weeks ago, and select one of us to go forward and make the case that there should be should be changed this session so we wouldn't have to go back and revisit where we left off at that pretty awful time at the end of '07. But we really hadn't discussed the selection process or who was eligible, who wasn't, who was interested and who wasn't until we got to the meeting that Friday night.
And so it just happened all that evening?
Happened all that evening, yeah. Happened. There was a list produced with all 11 names, and the question was asked, you may now remove your name from the list if you don't want to be considered. And I really took a long pause to think about it, and I really kind of said, well, it's probably not going to be me anyway, so what the hell?
Right.
So I left it on there.
Just leave my name on there, see what happens.
Right.
It'll be a gas, whatever happens. You talked about the awful experience that you'd had in '07. Can you flesh that out a little bit? What exactly was it that this group, or you specifically, reacted to about the last session, or the last 3 sessions, in fact, that made you think change was necessary?
Well, I think if you asked all 11 of us, you probably get some different answers.
Right.
In my case, it really wasn't a personal thing. I hadn't had no quarrels with Speaker Craddock. He's a friend of mine. I respect him enormously. He and Nadine have both, I describe it as having made historic sacrifices in service to Texas for 40 years. And I really do salute him for that. So in my case, it was really about the tone of our politics in the House and the work product that we were producing or not producing. The end of the last session was so bitter and so acrimonious and so broken down that I just didn't want to go through another 140 days of every single day having this big personality conflict potentially flaring up. But in no way was this a personal thing. I agree with Tom Craddock on policy matters most of the time, but I really made the decision after the elections and the Republican majority had dwindled to 76, 74, that it was really time to do something about it.
Were you part of the group that considered joining forces to oust Speaker Craddock last session?
I was not.
Obviously something changed, because if you were not prepared to oust Speaker Craddock at the end of the last session, but you were prepared before the beginning of this session, something must have changed in your mind.
Well, something did change, and it revolved mainly around the election process.
The result of the election.
The result of the election and the way internally in the Republican Party people were targeted, incumbents were targeted. I don't agree with that approach. I think we need to be building the party and protecting incumbents.
Have you now pledged, based on what you said, that you will not be party to finding challengers for incumbents in your party or in the other party at a primary day?
Yeah, I have no interest in ousting incumbents.
Even apostate Republicans say, which was sometimes the discussion before.
No, I want to grow the party, and I haven't really given a great deal of thought to 2010 elections. 2 weeks ago, I wasn't really thinking about being speaker either.
Right. Fair enough.
But the politics will take care of itself. I'm really focused on the work we have to do in the next 137 more days.
It's very hard, as gracious as you have been and as you are today to Speaker Craddock, not to hear you talk about the reasons for needing a new speaker. It's hard not to think of those things as a direct rebuke of Speaker Craddock and of his leadership style.
No, it really isn't in my case. I mean, some others may give you a different answer, but I sincerely don't. I had a great conversation with him yesterday.
Right.
I have a world of respect for him. I just think that we were in such a bad place that it was time to sort of turn the page and move forward. It takes more than one person to get in the position we were in, so there's plenty of blame to go around. He was just the focal point because he was the leader of the House.
Okay, you've now been in the job for 4 days. What have you learned? You must have seen, from your perspective as Speaker these last couple days, some things about the House. What have you taken away from it?
One thing I've learned that I suspected before is that there's an awful lot of talent and goodwill in the House that hasn't been on much display in the last couple of years since I've been a member.
Because?
Because the atmosphere was so bad. But I think that's changing. I'm really feeling good about people's attitude. I can see people smiling. I can see people kind of eager to go to work in the House. And I hope it carries over the whole session where we are more collaborative than we've been in the last couple of sessions.
Even the people who were not necessarily supportive of your attempts to replace Speaker Craddock, the so-called Craddock R's.
Yes.
Those people are also walking around with smiles on their face. They're also demonstrating to you a willingness to turn the page and go forward.
I think so. Right. Yeah, I think so. And there may be a few people who don't know me very well, or maybe a little bit hesitant to change. But by and large, and I mean by an overwhelming majority, I'm feeling that people are very excited about moving forward and not picking up where we left off.
You have also told me previously that you intend to treat everybody, whether they were a supporter of yours on day one or even not today, equally. No retaliation.
Yeah.
Those people are not going to be busted down to bad committees or whatever else, right?
No, I mean, not intentionally.
Yeah.
One of the things that keeps me up nights lately, knowing that I have this committee work to do, is that there are 150 members and only so many committees, and there will be some changes. I mean, there always probably should be.
Right.
What I really am not looking forward to is disappointing people. I'm going to try to treat people fairly, but with 150 people under those rules, it's going to be impossible for everybody to be happy.
Right. Well, it was said to me this morning that you may be the first speaker in a long time who goes into the process of making committee assignments without an enemies list.
No, I don't. I don't have an enemies list.
Yeah. That you're going to go into this with an open mind to everybody and everything.
Yeah, I'm going to try to find talent and experience and judgment, and try to appoint strong chairmen and trust them.
A Democratic member told me last week that he understood coming out of the deal that resulted in the Democrats backing you as a near unified bloc, that they would get a proportional number of chairmanships, that in fact the Democrats would see perhaps something close to half of the committee chairmanships as part of the process that got you into the job. Do you care to comment on what your plans are?
Yeah, well, I can tell you there was no deal. No one's ever put any kind of conditions on my speaker work.
Right.
And I think it would be inappropriate to have tried to do that.
Right.
I think they've asked for fairness, and I've promised fairness in return, but I can't really define what that means yet.
There'll be a certain number of Democratic committee.
Oh, sure, but they were under Tom Craddick, too.
But the Democrats who chaired committees under Speaker Craddick, if I'm not mistaken, were largely Craddick Democrats. They were not people who were enemies of Speaker Craddick.
Right, and I want to change that whole definition of this person's a Craddick D or a Craddick R or a whatever. I mean, I think that terminology just needs to go away.
There are no Straus Ds necessarily.
No, they're House members, and I think
we call it the Straus of representatives in the press these days, right? So, let me ask you about a story in the Dallas News today, speaking of management of the House, that suggested that the House has approved an expenditure of something like $750,000 on staff and office expenses. This follows the upgrade of the members' lounge, and this is at a time when state agencies are being asked to cut their budgets, when the economy is bad in Texas and all Texans are being asked to tighten their belts. It seems like that the opposite is happening in the House, at least as I read this story. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. The House voted 128 to 11 yesterday to help pay our staffs more during the session.
Right.
These people who come in and work the 140-day session and more work really hard. They have enormous responsibility. House staffs are very, very small compared to senator staffs. And I think it's completely in bounds to take better care of these people. I didn't see the newspaper story, but what it probably didn't say is that as soon as the 140-day session's gone, the numbers drop back down.
Right. But it will end up being a net increase in the expense on staff and office of,
well, temporarily,
$750,000.
Temporarily.
When you look at the number released for the revenue estimate by Comptroller Susan Combs, and you see that we're $9 billion down from where we were 2 years ago, do you as Speaker have a perspective, or as a former member, as to whether the state has enough money to do the business of the people?
Well, I think it's unfortunate the economy is stumbling, but it's also fortunate that we're in Texas and we're not in California or New Jersey, and we've handled our fiscal affairs, I think, responsibly in the past. Whether or not we have enough money to conduct the business of the state is something we're going to have to go through during the session, and I think it's very appropriate to question every line item in the budget, which we will do.
Do you expect this to be an austerity year as far as expenditures go by the state?
Sure, $9 billion is a lot of money.
$9 billion down.
$9 billion down is a lot of money, right.
The governor has, I guess, been talking about the possibility of dipping into the rainy day fund to give tax relief to Texans. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that it sounds good. I think we're probably going to have to use some of the rainy day fund to maybe at the end of the session make things work. I haven't really looked at the details of what he's proposing, but I believe most of that money came from oil and gas severance taxes, and I don't know how much of that money he wants to refund to oil and gas producers, but I think that might be kind of a difficult trick. Yeah. So I don't think that's likely.
Right. Well, let's talk about some specific issues. I think that one of the things that people in Texas are looking to do is to understand you and to understand who you are. They don't really know much about you yet, and to understand what you think. So let's talk about you politically, ideologically, philosophically. You are often described by people who think they know you as a moderate. Is that a word that you embrace or a word that you run from?
Well, I don't embrace any label, really. I think my record in the House has been mainstream conservative. I think what people confuse.
Well, that's a label. I mean, you like that label, mainstream conservative.
Well, yeah, it is a label, but I guess I think you would have to pick just a very small handful of votes to kind of separate me from somebody else who's in the Republican caucus.
Well, as you indicated, you voted a fair amount with Speaker Craddock.
I did, yeah,
previously.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he's pro-business and he's done a lot of good things for the state. I think what people probably who tag me with that maybe confuse independent with moderate, and maybe it's my personality a little bit too. I tend to be pretty quiet. I don't run up to the microphone a lot. I tend to be somebody who works behind the scenes. I try to build consensus. I have no problem reaching out to Democrats and working with them on issues where I know they're like-minded.
Right. But there are specific issues on which people in your party have looked at you and said, well, I'm not sure he's one of us. And in the run-up to your becoming Speaker, some quarters of the further right wing of the Republican Party attacked you over abortion. They attacked you over gambling. And they attacked you over the bill to ban gay foster parents, which you voted against the ban. So let's talk about each of those three so that you can, in your own words, clarify for people in your party and for the state what you actually believe as opposed to what we assume you believe. So on abortion, you are often described as a pro-choice Republican. True or false?
Oh, I kind of get tired of the pro-choice, pro-life thing. I take issues one at a time. I've supported parental consent. I support existing laws as they relate to abortion. I think that what I do reject, though, is this intense negative campaigning over wedge issues. And I'm a pass the budget and go home conservative. Not to label myself again, but I really don't enjoy the endless debate over things that are just meant for campaign fodder.
But they come up, Mr. Speaker. You know they come up, and you know that you're not going to, as Speaker, either be able to or choose to tell members, Republicans, say, who wish to bring up social issues.
Right.
They can't do it.
They're free to bring them up.
Right. But to be clear, you have not advocated for the overturning of existing laws on abortion.
No.
As some people have.
I think some of the hits I've taken from some people that are organized around that issue have more to do with women's health votes than they do abortion. I don't think we've had an abortion vote since I've been in the House. A pure anti-abortion thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Will your family stop making donations to Planned Parenthood, as has apparently been the case previously?
I don't know. I have to ask, but I think their interest in that has been long-standing. I think they're very committed to women's health issues. It's not, the abortion thing I know is there, and it's very high profile.
But Planned Parenthood finds itself, despite providing women's health services, finds itself squarely in this debate on abortion.
Yes, I wish they didn't, because they do so much good on the family planning and the women's health issues.
Okay. Let's talk about the ban on gay foster parents. You indicated to me again previously that you are a Barry Goldwater Republican on this issue, and you
Another label.
Well, but that was your label, though. Actually, you chose to label yourself, and you said that I thought a lot about whether to oppose the ban, and then I thought, what would Barry Goldwater do?
I did.
And so, would you talk a little bit about why you did, and then how you feel about the issue generally?
The amendment came up to ban gay foster parents, or adoption by gay foster parents, and the debate got kind of ugly, as it tends to on some of those hot issues, and I started looking behind, what was really behind this, and I saw something that really offended me. There was a several $million fiscal note attached to this, where a state agency would have to hire investigators to go to people's homes and look into their private lives. That bothered me a lot, as I tend to have a libertarian streak, where I don't think government ought to be in our personal lives. And so that was really my basis for voting against it. I'm not in favor of adoption by gay foster parents. However, there are worse things than that, and that being that kids being in government institutions as their homes, and that I think is even worse.
Okay. Gambling, which has come up partly because, if not entirely because, this is a family business interest, right, in your family.
Right.
Would you talk about your position on this and why people in your party who oppose gambling on moral grounds or whatever else shouldn't regard your speakership as a problem for them?
Yeah, my family's been involved in thoroughbred racing and breeding for 80 years.
Right.
And I've been passionate about it. I've spent a lot of my life, around the game, around the business, and I love it. I went to the Kentucky Derby when I was 12 years old. My grandfather's horse ran second. It was really exciting, and I love to go to the races. But we also, my grandfather and my dad back in the 60s and 70s and 80s were very involved in bringing pari-mutuel racing back to Texas. My dad and uncle particularly stepped up and developed the racetrack in San Antonio. It's a business interest. It hadn't been a very successful one, but it's a business interest and a personal passion for me.
Right.
I understand the complications now that I'm in this role in the legislature, and I'm trying to find a way to kind of as best I can, wall myself away from it.
How do you do that?
Well, it's a good question. In fact, I've said a number of times people that are really involved in pushing, as it relates to gaming, horse racing and gaming issues, I think maybe my election as Speaker sets that effort back rather than pushing it forward.
Because you have to overcorrect to persuade people that you're not being biased in favor of that issue.
Yeah, I'm really sensitive to that, and I don't want my public service to be, anybody to confuse my public service and my personal business interests.
Let me ask you about another issue that may not have come up before the last couple of days in this conversation, but I can't help but bring up now, and that is voter ID.
Yeah.
Maybe you've heard there was a little fuss in the Senate this week.
Heard about it. Didn't get to watch it. I was busy, but
somebody said the House is acting like the Senate and the Senate is acting like the House this week.
We're off to a good start, right?
Well, anytime the press is over there, you're probably better.
Yes.
So let me ask you about this. I went back and looked, and on April 24th of 2007, a voter ID bill came up in the House of Representatives, and you voted yes on voter ID. Can we expect then that Speaker Straus will in some way change the tradition of the House or do anything else to make the likelihood of passage of voter ID greater, as Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst appears to have done, his protest notwithstanding, in the Senate?
Well, I don't think on that issue, I don't think that issue would be handled any differently by me than any other issue that I've talked about in the last couple of weeks. I mean, if the votes are there for it, then we have to take a look at it.
Right.
Is it a priority?
Yeah.
Well, I'm for fair elections. Yeah. I don't know exactly what the Senate's planning on sending over, or on what the House, what House members may be proposing themselves. But I think an examination of voting procedures is appropriate.
With respect, Speaker, no one isn't for fair elections, or at least the majority of people are for fair elections. So given the fact that we are all for fair elections, what exactly about this moment, what exactly about the issue of fairness in elections requires us to be talking about voter ID as opposed to the more pressing issues of this state right now?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think we'll have time to investigate that during the session.
You observed just now, I think very interestingly, that it's going to be up to the members to see if they choose to bring this up. You view the speakership not as the person who sets the legislative priorities, who pushes issues or blocks others. You really do believe that your job is to enable the will of the House to be done.
Yes, and I'm not naive. I know there are going to be judgment calls I have to make.
Right.
And there are going to be some ups and downs and some good days and some bad days. And I hope that I can just kind of help keep morale where it is right now, that people think they have a fair shot, that everybody has to go work their own issues and get their own votes for things and not look to the Speaker's office for too much help, but also not look to the Speaker's office for too much hindrance either for what they want to work on.
But surely there are things that you care about, or that you as State Representative Straus cared about.
Yeah, sure.
And that maybe you now as Speaker Straus care about, specific issues that are priorities for you. Give me an example of something that in the remaining minute or two we have here. What's something that you care particularly about that you expect to be taken up by
public education, higher education,
Right.
transportation, needs of the community I represent, the needs of Texas and workforce issues going forward and into the future, realizing that changing demographics and some of the things that we haven't done so well in the past in those areas. But my agenda isn't really the House's agenda. But I think that some of those issues I just raised are important to a lot of other members, so I'm not worried about the things I care about being lost in the shuffle.
Right. So the House's agenda will be the House's agenda, said another way, not the Straus agenda.
Right. I'll represent the House, and I hope we can get back to that model of doing business.
And continue to represent your district.
Yeah, I don't think there's a conflict there, and I think my district knows where I come from, and right. I'm not concerned about the House going a different direction from the district that I represent.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, Mr. Speaker. I hope you have a good session. I think all the people here and all the people in Texas would like nothing more for this to be harmonious.
Yes.
And do the business. And so we thank you very much and wish you good luck.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Funding for Texas Monthly Talks is provided in part by Public Strategies Incorporated, managing campaigns for corporations, around the clock, around the world. And by J.P. Morgan Chase, a Texas financial institution serving large and small businesses, governments, schools, churches, and individual Texans just like you for more than 135 years. And also by the Matson McHale Foundation in support of public television. And by MFI Foundation, improving the quality of life within our community. And also by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation. And viewers like you. Thank you.